My name is Courtney. I'm 35. And the last time I stood in my parents' dining room, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon yams clung to me like smoke while my father told me not to come back. He didn't shout. He didn't slam his fist. Oh, he said it in the bored, steady voice he used to read utility bills at the kitchen table. A man reporting numbers, not delivering a verdict. But it landed like a door bolt. It was Thanksgiving, the day our family treated like a test we had to pass. You measured good years in the crispness of the turkey skin and how early the twins started wrestling in the living room. Bad years smelled faintly of scorched rolls and swallowed words. This year, the year everything cracked, the house was already too warm by noon. The oven had been on since dawn. The football game hissed from the living room, and the radiator in the dining room ticked and sighed, even though no one touched the thermostat. My mother believed the bird got dry if the house ran too cool. She also believed the house should look expensive without being expensive, so she pressed the good tablecloth the night before and tucked cloth napkins into little brass rings that left green rings on your fingers. I pulled into their driveway at 3:05 p.m., 5 minutes late. It felt like being an hour late to church. Mom's minivan sat crooked in its usual spot because the driver's side door hated the brick edging. The twins, Nick and Darren, both 27, 6 foot and worn sneakers, had left 2 bikes leaning against the sagging fence as if the fence might eventually learn to hold itself up if you gave it enough responsibility. I sat with the engine off for a minute and watched the front window. The lace curtain moved. The cat's triangle ear and my mother's forehead occupied the same inch of glass. Even after all these years, she waited by the window for me. I took out the pie, pumpkin, store-bought, but transferred into the old glass dish I kept at my place for this exact performance. And the dark bottle of Pinot I knew my dad would say was too fancy to taste like anything. I taped a gift card to the pie plate's underside. A month of groceries if you were careful. I felt the tug of the card's corner on my palm like a small secret. The door opened before I reached it. "You're late," Mom said, but she smiled as she said it, the way she smiles at a cashier who gives too much change and then takes it back. She wore her holiday sweater, the oatmeal one with a single applique leaf over the left shoulder, and an apron that came from a fundraiser at church. Flour dusted both elbows. The cat threaded between her calves, and I bent to rub the top of his head with 2 fingers. He smelled like radiator dust and gravy. "Traffic," I said. The word landed lamely. There was never traffic on our side of town unless a parade got lost. She kissed my cheek. Her lipstick left a soft peony mark that I would later find in the bathroom mirror and scrub off with a tissue. "They're starving," she said. "Go say hi. Your brothers have already decided to hate the Lions." "Bold of them to pretend it's a decision," I said. I followed her into the warm, old paint hall, the smell of onions and butter getting louder until it was a whole language. Dad was in his chair, smooth-handled beer sweating on a coaster, his eyes on the game, his fingers on his phone. He typed the way he did everything that wasn't a tool in his hand, carefully like it could bite. He looked up when I came in, and the corner of his mouth folded up, almost a smile. "Court," he said. He only ever used the first half of my name when other people were around, like admitting you named your child something with 3 syllables was an indulgence. I leaned down and hugged him. He smelled like ivory soap in the garage. Under it, sweat. He'd been in and out all morning, shuffling pans between oven and the old gas grill in back because the oven ran hot, and the grill made a decent auxiliary. "Hey," I said. "How's the defense?" I didn't care about stats. I cared that men in our family talked best with their eyes pointed at something else. "Like a screen door," he said. He gestured at the TV. A linebacker jogged off the field like a man who'd forgotten why he came into the room. "That wine?" "For you," I said, setting the bottle on the coffee table. "For me, for Mom. For anyone who wants to argue about whether canned cranberry is better than fresh." "Canned," said Nick from the floor without looking up. He sat cross-legged by the coffee table, elbows planted, shelling a pile of the store's pecans he'd somehow managed to turn into a major event. The shells made small gunshot sounds when they cracked. He had a thin scar on his left eyebrow from a skateboard accident at 12. He'd refused stitches and the scar stayed, and became the excuse he gave for why job interviewers didn't call. His hair was too long again. It made him look 20 and tired. "Fresh," said Darren from the couch, stretching his arms like he'd done something to deserve the sound his joints made. He wore the thin gold chain our grandfather left him, and he kept touching it like he was making sure it hadn't vanished. His socks didn't match. They never did. "Fresh means you did something. Canned means you made time for the playoffs," Dad said, and the twins laughed the way they always laughed at him. It was affectionate and a little cruel, like they'd agreed in advance to keep him on the hook. I hugged both of them, which meant I leaned down and bumped my forehead against each of theirs and kissed the crown of their heads like they were still kids playing a video game and not paying attention. They leaned in because habit is stronger than pride. "How's work?" I asked Nick. He shrugged in the way that says, "If you press me, I'll feel small." "Seasonal hours," he said. His mouth flicked. "Season is over in 2 weeks." "You'll land something," I said, as if words were trampolines. "Sure," he said, and shelled another pecan, and the tiny meat slid into his palm like a secret. From the kitchen, Mom called, "Can someone set the table?" Which meant me. She never said my name when she was assigning tasks. She knew I'd hear it anyway. The dining room looked like a magazine where the photographer was late. The tablecloth lay too smooth. The napkins sat in their little brass rings like soldiers who didn't expect to be used, and the centerpiece, the fake berry wreath around the hurricane lamp, tilted in a way that said, "Last year's storage box got crushed." I set out the plates and knives and forks and the heavy water glasses you could chip a tooth on if you forgot yourself. I put the pie down on the sideboard under the framed photo of me at graduation. My father's arm was around my shoulders in that photo, and he looked at the camera like he believed in a future where we all acted like better versions of ourselves. In the kitchen, steam shined the windows. The turkey rested on the counter under a tent of foil like a sleeping animal. The skin looked lacquered. Mom basted it one last time, not because it needed it, but because she needed to do something with her hands. On the back burner, gravy burped fatly. Stovetop stuffing in the old battered Dutch oven. Green bean casserole, the kind with the fried onions that dissolve when you stab them with a fork. Sweet potatoes under tiny charred marshmallows that my mother called too much, and made anyway because the twins had once said they liked them, and this to her meant they liked them forever. "Where's your sweater?" Mom asked me. "I thought you were going to wear that cream one." "It's in the car," I said. I was running hot. "Go get it when we sit," she said. "Pictures will look better." Of all the sentences she loved, that one, "pictures will look better," was her favorite spell. It made you sit up straighter when your whole life wanted to sink. We carried dishes in a line. Me, Mom, then Darren, because Nick had wrapped himself around the pecans like he'd sworn a blood oath. Dad turned off the TV with a sigh you could hear under the house sounds. He stood, wiped his hands down his jeans, and took his seat at the head of the table. Not because he needed to be the head, because it was the only chair that didn't wobble. Traditions in our family were these practical little lies we told about furniture. We bowed our heads while Mom said grace. Oh, her prayers were always clean and short, the verbal equivalent of a made bed. She asked for gratitude without saying the word money. She asked for strength without saying pride. She said amen, and we repeated it like a closing credit. And then for the first 20 minutes, everything pretended to be normal. We passed the dishes. We admired the turkey as if it might admire us back. Mom's cheeks wore that anxious shine of someone orchestrating too many moving parts. Dad asked Darren about the warehouse job, and Darren said it was fine and chose not to say it was a temp contract with a supervisor who pronounced his name wrong every day like a dare. Nick told a funny story about a customer who tried to return a printer with soup inside it. We laughed and we all pretended that laughter could rainproof the roof. I waited for the moment. The moment came when Dad asked, "How's the new account?" And I realized he'd been practicing the question in his head so he wouldn't screw it up. "Busy," I said. I cut my turkey too carefully, like precision might have a moral effect. We ran a site visit on Monday. They want to close before year end for tax reasons. Close, he said, like it was a door. They'll get a better rate if we finalize before December 31st, I said. I saw Mom vent the potatoes with the spoon, the way she does when she's trying to make space for a subject to cool. It's complicated, I added, and smiled, which was code for I know what saying numbers at this table does, and I'm not going to do it. Darren raised his glass. To complicated, he said. It should have landed as a joke. It landed as foreshadowing. We were doing okay. We were reading from the script that keeps a family like ours from throwing plates. Everyone knew their lines. Then the roof made a noise. It wasn't a dramatic noise. It was a patient drip into the shallow bowl Mom had tucked in the corner, near the hutch weeks ago, after the first October storm. The sound was soft and hollow, the sound of a clock that forgot how to tick. We all looked at the ceiling in the same slow way, like a single animal noticing weather. Mom said, "It's not bad." Dad said, "It's fine." Darren said, "It's just the one spot." Nick said, "I moved the bowl an inch to the left. It misses the leg now." And I, like an idiot, like a person who believes problems are puzzles if you love them enough, said, "I can call the contractor who did mine. He could probably swing by tomorrow and at least give you—" "No," Dad said, fast enough to cut the air. His fork scraped his plate. He didn't look at me. "We don't need a quote," I finished, too bright. "Just a quote." He kept not looking at me. "We'll handle it." The twins watched the ball pass over our heads. Nick's eyebrows did their warning dance. Darren's mouth went tight like a knot you want to be useful. "It's just a phone call," I said softer. "I have his number. He's fair and we'll handle it," Dad repeated. And this time he said it to his plate, to himself, to the idea of a man he'd carved and sanded and lacquered and kept on a high shelf for years. He reached for his beer and didn't drink. Mom touched his wrist. She whispered something without sound. He shrugged her off without force, and the motion wasn't large, but it was loud. Silence crowded the table. The radiator ticked like it had an opinion. I nodded, like the kind of person in a boardroom who knows when to pivot. "Okay," I said. "Okay." I put my hands in my lap and locked them together. You learn to sit on your hands when you've spent a decade paying for other people's problems. You learn to sit and let other people's pride try to be a chair. We tried to restart the script. Darren asked about the cranberry sauce. Nick made a joke about the Lions as if football could still earn its place as an escape hatch. I took a bite of turkey and tasted salt and sugar and nothing. It's astonishing how fast a room can fill with the thing nobody says. And then Nick, because the twins are mirrors and one of them always breaks first, said, "Court's just trying to help, Dad." It wasn't a rescue. It was gasoline. Dad looked up at me then, and his eyes had the flat shine I recognized from mornings he'd come home from the plant, in the old days after a double where someone got laid off. The shine of a man pretending not to hurt so he can still be useful. "Is she?" he said. Not a question. His voice came out like a level laid on a shaky board. "I am," I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "I didn't mean to make anyone feel—" "What you meant," he said, and this is where his voice changed, like a record that skips into a groove it remembers, "isn't the same as what you do." "James," Mom said, low. She only used his name when she wanted to touch the brake without moving her foot. I tried to steady the table with an apology. "I'm sorry," I said. I heard the drip and thought." "You heard a drip and thought you heard a bill," he said. He lifted his beer and set it down without drinking. The light caught the little wet circle on the coaster. "You always think you hear bills." Something prickled under my skin, a rash of defense waiting. I said nothing. I bit the inside of my cheek until my mouth tasted like blood and my mother's lipstick. Darren leaned forward, elbows on the table like he wanted to hold it up. "The roof's my fault anyway," he said. I meant to tarp it last storm in the ladder. It's not your fault, Mom said, too quick. The shingles are old. We could have replaced them last fall, Dad said. He didn't look at anyone. But we had other priorities. The word priorities sat there like something living. I heard myself say, I brought a gift card for groceries this month, just in case prices. Nick's laugh was short and broke in the middle. Just in case prices, he repeated. Like prices have been a surprise since 2020. It's just a help, I said helplessly. And there it is, Dad said, and pushed his chair back an inch, enough for the legs to make their sound. He looked at me, actually looked at me, and I could see how much older his face had gotten in the last 2 years. Not just lines, the kind of old that lives in the way a jaw holds a day. Help, he said. Your favorite word? The radiator hissed. The bowl in the corner caught another drop. The house waited. I'm not trying to buy anything, I said. The words felt ridiculous. Oh, who says that at their own parents' table? His mouth did a small thing like a smile's dried-out cousin. You already bought your chair at this table. Dad, Darren said. He used the polite boy voice, and my heart broke that he still had it. Let her talk, Nick said. She's good at it. It wasn't kind. It was reflex. The old sibling rhythm. Push your sister away before she leaves you. I breathed. I counted to 5. It didn't help. I don't want strings on anything, I said. I don't want to be in charge. I want the roof not to leak and the fridge to stay full and Mom not to ration her meds when... Don't, Mom said, sharp, like the word itself could break a plate. Not at the table. Right, I said. Not at the table. I put my napkin down. I couldn't tell if my hands were shaking, but the napkin decided they were. I'm sorry. We can talk after... After, Dad said. We've finished pretending. James, Mom said again. The cat chose that moment to jump into the empty chair beside her and curl into a perfect, obscene bread loaf. I looked at my father and tried to find the man who taught me to braid rope and tie down tarps tight enough that storms sounded like someone else's weather. He looked back at me and I couldn't tell if he could see me or if he saw only the shape of me filled with dollar signs. I felt heat climb my throat. Shame is a hot thing. It will boil whatever you've been cooking. Do you want me to leave? I asked. I said it calmly, and I hated that calm. The calm I use in boardrooms when men with expensive watches interrupt my sentences. It came from the same place, and I didn't want that part of me in this room. Mom made a sound like air moving through a broken flute. No one said, yes, Dad said. The word was a blade. It split the room into before and after. You don't think a single syllable can do that until it does and you're standing on the wrong side of it. No one moved. The television in the living room clicked as if it had exhaled. Outside, a car door slammed 2 streets over. James, Mom said, and stood, and set her napkin down, and picked it back up, and set it down again. Darren half stood and then sat, his body undecided, the way he looks when he's about to lift something heavier than he should. Nick, my brother who can sleep through a tornado and wake with the exact face, stared at the gravy boat like it might tell him what to do. I swallowed. It was an ugly, small sound. Okay, I said. If that's what you want. It's what I need, Dad said. He didn't look triumphant. He looked like a man handing a cashier the last bill in his wallet. I stood. My chair made a noise across the wood that I could feel in my teeth. I smoothed the tablecloth out of the way so the napkin I'd folded wouldn't fall. Ritual is hard to put down. I'll get my sweater, I said, as if remembering the prop might save the scene. Leave the keys, Dad said. It took me a second to understand him. What? The keys? He said. To the house. A second drip landed in the bowl by the hutch. I wondered how full it would have to get before someone stood up and dealt with it. You have a copy, I said. And I don't want you to have one, he said. James, Mom said, more breath than word. The twins looked between us like ball boys who'd been told to referee. Darren's mouth opened. He closed it. I put my hand into my bag, found the familiar weight of the ring with the spare, and set it on the runner beside the centerpiece. It made almost no sound. That felt right. The keys had never been loud in my life. They'd just opened things. You can keep the garage key, Dad said, and then flinched at his own meanness. I left the garage key on the runner, too. Mom reached and covered my hand before I could pull it back. Her fingers were hot from the oven and smelled like rosemary. Her eyes were wet and tired and furious and sorry all at once. Please, she said, but I couldn't tell which of us she meant. I'll come back tomorrow for the pie dish, I said, because sentences are ropes, and you grab whichever one is closest when the water rises. Mail it to yourself, Nick said. He didn't say it like a joke. He said it like an assignment he didn't want. I looked at him. At the scar above his eyebrow? At the boy who once stood up to a bully for me in 7th grade by putting a grasshopper in the bully's locker? At the man who now treated me like a woman who sold grasshoppers door to door? I tried to find the thread between those two people and came up empty. I'll see you, I told my mother. Will you? Dad asked. I didn't answer. Some things deserve silence. The hallway felt narrower than it had an hour earlier. The family photos on the right wall looked like portraits of strangers. Our faces at birthdays, lank hair and frosting. The old thermostat wore a new digital face. The cat followed me to the door and sat with his tail curled like punctuation. My hand was stupid with habit. I reached for the doorknob and then I remembered to open it only halfway because the hinge stuck if you went too far. I'd paid the guy to oil it last spring, but the stick came back because this house refused to let anything be permanent that wasn't broken. On the porch, the air was a relief. Cold, open, not butter-flavored. The pale sky looked like notebook paper. The lines already drawn and waiting for someone to write the wrong thing. A neighbor 2 houses down stood in his yard smoking and pretending not to look. I walked to my car and put the pie, ridiculous, faithful pie, on the passenger seat like a pet. I sat. The engine turned over with its same stubborn sound. The radio came on loud and I killed it. For a full minute I didn't cry. I stared at my hands on the steering wheel like they belonged to a stranger and thought about turkey. About how it dries out if you let it. About how you need stock to bring anything back. The second minute I cried in a way that made my face ugly. The kind of crying that punishes you for trying not to. I cried for the keys on the table and the bowl under the leak and the brass napkin rings that turn everyone's fingers green. When I could breathe again, I looked up into the front window, expecting the curtain to twitch. It didn't. It hung still and delicate, like the house had learned a new trick. My phone lit in the cup holder. A text from Darren. You shouldn't have pushed him about the roof. Then, before I could reply, another from Nick. Next time, don't show up like a sponsor at a meeting. And then, as if the universe wanted to deliver a punchline, a group text from Mom with a photo. The table, the turkey, the 4 plates, the place where my plate had been already filled by the pie in the center, as if the empty space required covering. Under it, one word, blessed. I put the car in reverse. The gravel made its small, crunchy hymn under the tires. I took the long way home. There's no good way out of the subdivision, but there is a way that takes you past the ball field where we used to play on Saturday mornings, the one with the lopsided bleachers. Someone had hung a banner that read, Holiday Toy Drive. A boy stood on the corner holding a cardboard sign for the drive, cheeks red, nose running, a knitted hat with a pom-pom too large for his head. I rolled my window down and put the grocery gift card in his mitten. He blinked at it, and then at me. Thanks, he said, baffled, like I'd handed him a foreign coin. My mom says don't take cash. It's not cash, I said. It's food. I almost said it's love and stopped myself. He nodded solemnly and trotted back to the folding table someone had decorated with a tinsel garland. Behind him, a woman in a bright pink parka waved like she didn't know how much she was waving. By the time I reached the highway, the daylight had thinned to that pewter flatness November loves. The radio tempted me with the holiday station. I spared myself and let the heater hiss. I kept thinking, when you grow up in a house where love and sacrifice are the same word, you learn early that giving means belonging. That was the rule I grew up with. Give enough and they'll keep you. I didn't know how wrong that lesson would turn out to be. I used to think we were an ordinary family. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. Dad worked maintenance at the county plant. Mom was a school librarian. They lived on paychecks, coupons, and quiet pride. My brothers Nick and Darren were identical twins. Mischievous, loud, inseparable. And I was the oldest, the one who helped with homework, packed lunches, kept the peace. Back then, my father called me his steady one. He used to say, "Court, you're the anchor in this house." I wore that like a badge of honor. Then the plant closed. Overnight, 300 people in our small town lost their jobs. My father came home that day with his shoulders slumped like a man twice his age. The layoff papers were folded in his back pocket. The smell of oil and dust clinging to him. I was 25 then, living in the city, just starting to climb the ladder in finance. I remember calling home, and my mother's voice cracked when she said, "Your dad's trying to stay positive." But I could hear it, the quiet panic underneath. At first, I sent money for groceries, then for utilities, then for Mom's medication when her rheumatoid arthritis started getting worse and she had to quit her job. It was supposed to be temporary, just until they got back on their feet. They never did. The first few transfers were easy. I had just been promoted, and my new salary felt unreal, more than anyone in my family had ever made. I told myself it was no big deal. $3,000 a month won't kill me? And it didn't. Not at first. Mom cried the first time I sent it. Dad said, "You don't have to, kiddo, but thank you." That thank you meant everything. It made me feel useful, connected. Like I could fix things. But gratitude has an expiration date. By the end of the first year, it wasn't thank you. It was, can you send it a bit early? By the second, it became, it's only fair. You can afford it. And by the third, they stopped mentioning it altogether. It was just expected. Nick and Darren were 21 then. They dropped out of community college after one semester. Said tuition was a scam. Nick started a landscaping business that lasted 3 months. Darren worked part-time at a hardware store but spent most nights gaming. They were still living at home. When I visited, I tried to talk to them about responsibility. Guys, you need to start thinking long-term. What happens when Mom and Dad can't keep up the mortgage? Nick shrugged. You're thinking too much, Court. We're figuring it out. And Darren added with a grin, that's why we've got you, right? He said it as a joke. But no one laughed. The first time I felt resentment wasn't even about the money. It was about the silence. It was my birthday, my 30th. I had just closed my biggest client deal to date, and my firm sent me champagne. I waited all day for a call from home. Nothing. Finally, around 9 p.m., Mom texted, "Happy B-Day, sweetheart. Been crazy here. Dad's out of sorts." Attached was a photo of a half-eaten cake, obviously bought for someone else. I stared at that message and realized something. They didn't see me anymore. They saw what I did for them. That night, I sat on my balcony overlooking the city, and for the first time, the skyline felt like a cage instead of a view. Every hour I worked, every late night at the office, it wasn't for me anymore. It was for them. To keep their lights on, to pay their bills, to make sure the twins didn't complain. I told myself that's what good daughters do. But inside, something small and fragile started to crack. Over the years, the pattern solidified. I sent money every first of the month like clockwork. If I was late, even by a day, Mom would text, "Everything okay? We've got a few things pending." It wasn't guilt. It was expectation. I started keeping a spreadsheet, I don't know why. Maybe to remind myself that it was real. In 7 years, I transferred over $252,000, $250,000, to people who never once asked me how I was doing. My therapist, Dr. Lane, asked me once, "Why do you keep doing it?" And I said, "Because I can't stand the thought of them suffering." She looked at me quietly for a long moment. Or, she said, "You can't stand the thought of being the one who lets them." That stayed with me, because deep down, I knew she was right. It wasn't generosity anymore, it was fear. Fear that if I stopped, they'd stop loving me. Fear that my worth depended on what I gave. I lost my relationship first. His name was Aaron, and he was patient, until he wasn't. He used to joke that I was married to my job. When I started using weekends to manage my parents' paperwork and taxes, he stopped joking. He said, "You can't save everyone, Courtney. You don't even know how to save yourself." I told him that was cruel. He said, "No, it's the truth." 3 weeks later, he moved out. After that, my world shrank to numbers, spreadsheets and statements, receipts. I measured love in wire transfers. If I sent money, I was good. If I didn't, I was selfish. When my friends invited me out, I found excuses. When my coworkers talked about buying condos, I thought about my parents' mortgage. When my boss offered me a promotion that required relocation to Chicago, I said no, because who would look after them? That's the thing about obligation. It disguises itself as purpose. Until one day you wake up and realize it's just a chain. The twins started treating me differently as the years went on. Not with gratitude, with resentment. Whenever I visited, Nick made little digs about my corporate attitude. Darren said I didn't get real life anymore. Once when I parked my car, a used Lexus, nothing extravagant, Nick whistled. "Nice wheels. Must be nice being rich." I laughed it off, but his tone wasn't teasing. It was bitter. That Thanksgiving, Mom asked if I could cover the new washing machine. I said sure. Nick muttered, "Of course you can. Courtney can cover anything." Dad didn't correct him. By then, I had stopped expecting thanks. But I hadn't stopped hoping for it. It was 2 years before that final Thanksgiving, the one that ended everything. I had just paid off their property taxes for the second time when I came home for Easter. Dad was grilling outside. Mom was setting the table. Nick and Darren were arguing over who got the last beer. I brought up the idea of them starting to take over some expenses. "Maybe you guys could handle the utilities?" Just to start shifting things a little. Silence. Then Nick laughed. "You serious?" Darren frowned. "We barely make enough for gas." Mom said softly, "Sweetheart, we appreciate your help. You know your brothers are still finding their footing." Finding their footing at 25. I looked at my father. He avoided my eyes and said, "They're doing their best." That was the moment I realized I wasn't helping them anymore. I was enabling them. By last November, I had stopped visiting as often. Every time I walked through that front door, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Mom would fuss over me, but her eyes carried something like guilt. Dad was quieter. Nick and Darren were louder. The imbalance was unspoken, but it filled the room. I tried to bring normalcy back. I sent money for Mom's medication, helped Nick refinance his truck loan, helped Darren with his credit card debt. Each time they promised to pay me back. No one ever did. I was exhausted, not from work, but from carrying them. And I started to fantasize about stopping, about what would happen if I just didn't send the next payment. But then I'd picture Mom's face or Dad's sigh or Nick's sarcastic grin, and I'd give in again. That's what love looked like in our family. Endless giving until resentment was all that was left. A week before Thanksgiving, Dad called. Oh, it was rare for him to dial me directly. "Courtney," he said, his voice gravelly, "don't bring anything big this year." "What do you mean?" "No expensive gifts. No checks. Just come as our daughter." I remember smiling into the phone. "I always do, Dad." But my stomach tightened. because I knew he didn't believe that. I had already planned their Thanksgiving surprise, paying off the last of the mortgage. It felt symbolic, like closing a circle, like finally freeing them. I didn't know it would be the thing that tore us apart. I replayed that conversation 1,000 times after that night. The look in Dad's eyes when he said, "We don't need your charity." Nick's smirk when he threw my past at me. "No wonder Aaron left you." Mom's tears the way Darren couldn't even meet my eyes. I thought I was helping them stand, but all I'd done was teach them how to lean. When I left that house on Thanksgiving night, I didn't know what would come next. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. Still, in the weeks that followed, I kept waiting for an apology, a message, a sign they understood. Instead, the only thing that came was silence. And silence, I learned, is its own kind of cruelty. That was the year I realized love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's servitude dressed up as devotion. And once you've seen that truth, you can't unsee it. That truth is what shaped everything that came next. The decision, the cut, the quiet revenge that would finally free me. I didn't go home that night. Not the next day, not the week after. And eventually home stopped meaning anything at all. The first 3 days were the hardest. I kept checking my phone like some part of me still believed they'd reach out, that Dad would sober up and say, "I didn't mean it, kiddo." But silence has a way of growing roots. By the 4th day, it felt permanent. Mom texted first. "Your father was just upset. Don't take it to heart. Come back for Sunday dinner." I read it 5 times before deleting it. Then came Darren. "You know how Dad gets. Don't be dramatic. We need you right now." That one made me laugh bitterly. The word need had always been their way of saying obey. When Nick finally wrote, it wasn't even a message. It was a post, a blurry photo of the Thanksgiving table with a caption, "Some people think money buys love. It doesn't." I didn't comment. I didn't call. I just scrolled past it like he was a stranger. By the second week, the texts turned to guilt trips. "Mom's not sleeping. We can't make the mortgage without you. Don't let pride ruin family." And somewhere between those lines, I realized what they still didn't understand. It wasn't pride keeping me away. It was survival. On the 10th day after Thanksgiving, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank email draft open on my laptop. The cursor blinked like a pulse. For years, I'd written transfer confirmations, payment notes, reminders. This would be my last one. Subject, moving forward. I've given this a lot of thought. I'm ending all financial support effective immediately. This isn't punishment. It's self-preservation. I love you, but love has turned into obligation, and that's not love at all. I've paid your bills, your debts, your safety nets for nearly a decade. I did it because I wanted you safe, but it only made you resent me and yourselves. You made it clear I'm not welcome unless I stop being the person who helps. So I'm giving you what you asked for, independence. Please don't contact me asking for more money. If you need guidance, I've attached links to free financial counseling and state aid programs. I hope one day you'll see this not as abandonment, but as release. Courtney. I hovered over send for a long time. When I finally clicked it, I felt physically lighter and terrified at the same time. Because when you've spent your whole life being useful, uselessness feels like death. The silence didn't last long. Within hours, my inbox filled up. Mom's message came first. "How could you do this? We gave you everything. You wouldn't even have your career without us. Your father is devastated." Nick's was sharper. "You finally showed your true colors. Guess you were only generous as long as people kissed your ass." Darren's was quieter. "I get that you're angry, but we really can't make ends meet. Just one more month, please." I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I blocked their numbers and set an auto response. "Courtney is unavailable at this time." For the first time in 10 years, the first of the month came and went without a transfer. It felt both freeing and horrifying. like walking off a cliff and realizing you were meant to fly all along. 2 weeks later, I got a letter, a real one, not email. My mother's handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a folded hospital bill and a note. I was in the ER last night. Stress, the doctor said, but don't worry, we'll figure it out somehow. I stared at it for a long time, feeling that old reflex to fix, to pay, to rescue. Then I shredded it. It wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. If I gave in now, I'd undo everything. The next day, Darren called from a blocked number. I didn't answer, but the voicemail played automatically. "You're killing Mom? I hope you're happy." I turned the volume down and sat in the quiet. That sentence, "You're killing Mama," was the exact weapon they'd always used. Guilt sharpened to a knife. And for the first time, it didn't cut. The following Sunday, Nick posted again. A photo of my parents' house with the caption, "Hard to believe some people can watch their own family lose everything and feel nothing." Dozens of comments poured in. Neighbors, relatives, church friends. "So sorry, Nick." Family should help family. Money makes people cold. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. Let them tell their story. I'd spent my whole life financing it. 2 days later, a package arrived at my door. Inside, a box of family photos, each one cut in half, my face missing. Somebody had taken scissors to every memory. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I started laughing. Not out of joy, but exhaustion. They were right. I was gone from that family, and for once I was fine with that. I thought cutting them off would bring peace. It didn't. Not right away. The first month was noise. Messages, guilt, pity from relatives. The second month was silence again, and that was worse. I missed the chaos. Not because I wanted them back, but because I'd built my identity around fixing things. Without them, there was no one left to save. So I turned inward. I went to therapy twice a week. I learned about codependence, about emotional enmeshment, about the difference between caring and caretaking. Dr. Lane said something that stuck. When you remove yourself from a toxic system, the system will do anything to pull you back. But if you stay strong long enough, it collapses without you. And that's not cruelty. That's truth. I held on to that line every time I doubted myself. By March, I started hearing things through the grapevine. My parents had defaulted on the mortgage. The twins were fighting over who should move in with them. Nick's girlfriend had left him. Darren had picked up extra shifts at the hardware store. The family group chat I'd been exiled from was now full of panic. Screenshots forwarded by a cousin who still talked to me quietly. They were drowning. I didn't gloat, but I didn't help either. Instead, I did something no one expected. I took all the money I'd been sending them, the same amount I would have transferred for the next year, and invested it into a small grant fund. Not for my family, but for women trying to rebuild their lives after financial abuse. I called it the Anchor Fund. It started with 5 women, then 15. By summer, we'd helped 31 women pay deposits, start businesses, escape dependency. Each time I signed a grant approval, I felt something heal in me. Something I didn't even know was still broken. One evening in July, I got a letter from Darren. No envelope, just a torn page slipped under my apartment door. I never figured out how he found my address. "Court, Dad's sick again. We might lose the house for real this time. I know you said you're done, but please, we need you. I'll pay you back someday. I swear. D." For the first time in months, I felt something like pity. Then I remembered Thanksgiving. His silence while Dad humiliated me. Nick's smirk. Mom's tears that never turned into defense. I took a pen and wrote on the same page. "You already did lose the house. The day you told me I wasn't family anymore." I folded it back into the crack of my door and let it stay there. When I came home that night, it was gone. A few weeks later, I heard they'd moved out of the house entirely. Sold what they could, split what was left. Mom and Dad rented a small apartment near the edge of town. Nick and Darren stopped speaking to each other. The family unit I'd bankrolled for a decade collapsed in 6 months, without my money holding it together. Dr. Lane called it a predictable unraveling of a codependent structure. I called it justice. Because the truth was simple. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had just stopped financing the illusion that it was still whole. People think revenge is loud. Screaming, slamming doors, dramatic exits. Mine wasn't. Mine was silence. Mine was living well, living freely, living without the constant ache of obligation. I started traveling again. I went to Lisbon in September, walked through narrow streets alone, and didn't have to check my phone once for a "can you send" message. I bought my first piece of art, a small oil painting of a woman standing on a cliff, hair whipping in the wind. The title? Letting Go. When I hung it in my apartment, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was empty, in the best way. That's the thing no one tells you about freedom. It doesn't feel triumphant. It feels quiet. Like walking out of a storm into an empty field. In November, and almost a year later, I got an email. The subject line read simply, "From Mom. We heard about your foundation. We're proud of you in our own way. Take care of yourself." No apology. No invitation. Just closure disguised as politeness. I stared at it for a while, then deleted it. Not out of spite, but because it no longer meant anything. They were strangers now. People I used to love. People who used to need me. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened the balcony doors, and let the cold November air rush in. Below, the city buzzed. Alive. Anonymous. Uncaring. For once, I didn't mind. Sometimes I think about the house. The creak of the stairs, the smell of Mom's candles, Dad's voice on Sunday mornings. Then I remind myself, nostalgia is just memory with the pain edited out. The truth is uglier. They loved me for what I gave, not for who I was. And I fed that love until it became poison. Now, when people talk about family, I stay quiet because I learned something they don't teach you in Hallmark cards. Sometimes love that demands your ruin isn't love, it's hunger. And the only way to survive it is to starve it out. Last week, the Anchor Fund hit its first $1 million goal. 31 women became 90. I shook hands, smiled for a photo, and someone asked, "What inspired you to start this?" I smiled and said, "Family." And for the first time, the word didn't hurt. That night, I went home, turned off my phone, and lit a single candle. No holiday, no guests, no noise, just peace. I thought about the last words I'd ever said in that dining room. "Then you'll never have to see me again." And how, after everything, I'd kept my promise. Because sometimes the truest revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's proving to yourself that you never needed them to begin with.